A simple cup of tea turns deadly. Welcome to Phantom Mystery. I am your host, Edmund Cross. Type in the comments where you're listening from. I love seeing this community grow with each story. Your thoughts mean so much. Let's step into Miss Marple's world. The afternoon sun slanted across the neat lawns of St. Mary Mead, turning the tops of the hollyhocks to gold and filling the air with the comfortable hum of bees. It was a day made for idle conversation over china teacups, and Mrs. Martha Willett intended to enjoy it thoroughly. She had invited a dozen or so acquaintances to her garden for what she called rather grandly her summer tea. In truth, it was an opportunity for the villagers to remark upon her new set of Wedgwood teapots, to admire her geranium beds, and perhaps to speculate, politely, of course, on how she afforded such luxuries after her late husband had left little more than debts behind. But gossip was as essential to St. Mary Mead as jam to a sponge cake, and none would refuse the chance to partake. Miss Jane Marple was among the company, perched comfortably in a wicker chair in the shade. With her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap, she looked quite as harmless and self-contained as ever. Yet her eyes, pale and thoughtful, missed nothing. She observed Mrs. Willett's fluttering hands as she poured tea, nervous hands betraying strain beneath the surface cheer. She noted how young Lydia Drake, the vicar's niece, sat apart from the others, her fingers plucking restlessly at her gloves. She noticed, too, the way Colonel Marchmont, ruddy-faced and pompous, spoke too loudly, as if to drown out something unsaid. It was all very ordinary until it was not. The talk had been of roses, then of the upcoming fete, and then, quite suddenly, of money. "I assure you," Mrs. Willett was saying with an almost shrill laugh, "I have no head for accounts at all. Mr. Trelawney insisted I let him handle everything." Mr. Trelawney was her late husband's solicitor, a man respected if not particularly liked. Several heads turned at the mention of his name, for there was a certain tension surrounding him of late, whispers of missing funds, curious dealings in London, and, though never proven, an unfortunate incident with a client's will. The murmurs were interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Trelawney himself, striding into the garden with his bowler hat tucked under one arm. He was a tall, spare man with a lined face and watchful eyes. "I hope I am not intruding," he said smoothly, though the silence that followed suggested that intruding was precisely what he was doing. He took a cup of tea from Mrs. Willett's trembling hand, sipped, and began to speak in his dry, precise manner. He had, he said, pressing business with Mrs. Willett concerning her husband's estate. Matters of probate could not wait. What happened next occurred so quickly that, for a moment, no one quite believed it. Mr. Trelawney had just raised his cup again when his face contorted, his lips twisting as though in astonishment or fury. The teacup slipped from his hand and shattered on the flagstones. He staggered, gave a dreadful choking sound, and collapsed among the neat flower beds. Mrs. Willett screamed. Lydia Drake dropped her gloves with a little gasp. Colonel Marchmont barked something incoherent and rushed forward. But it was Miss Marple who rose, calm and steady, and knelt at the fallen man's side. She touched his wrist lightly, then looked up. "I'm afraid," she said quietly, her voice carrying in the sudden hush, "that Mr. Trelawney is quite dead." For a moment the garden seemed utterly still, the roses too bright, the sky too blue for such a thing to have happened. Then the chatter broke forth, the rising, fearful buzz of speculation. Had he fainted? Was it apoplexy? Heart failure? Surely nothing more sinister. But Miss Marple's eyes, serene and untroubled, rested for just an instant on the teapot that Mrs. Willett had been so eager for everyone to admire. The scream that followed Miss Marple's quiet pronouncement trembled through the garden and then seemed to fall tidily into the hedges, leaving a silence arranged as carefully as the tea-table. Bees went on with their purposeful fussing among the roses. Bees, Miss Marple had often observed, understand the value of continuing with one's work. Colonel Marchmont recovered first, unfurling a large handkerchief with parade-ground certainty. "No one is to touch a thing," he commanded. which immediately impelled Mrs. Martha Willett to stoop toward a teaspoon, as though polish could banish calamity. Miss Marple's hand, light and practiced, guided the spoon back to its saucer. "Let it be, dear," she said in that mild voice to which people submit without noticing they have done so. She glanced once at the broken cup, the amber stain fingering the flagstones, and the proud Wedgwood teapot, so lately admired and now in its gleam, faintly indecent. Mr. Sampson, the grocer, trotted indoors to telephone with the air of a man who knows the right drawer for the right string. Lydia Drake, the vicar's niece, stood very straight and held her gloves like a school prize she did not know where to put. Dr. Haydock arrived in commendable time, hair startled by the breeze, tweed displaced by haste. He knelt, examined with brisk kindness, and rose with the sort of gentleness that comes of frequent practice. "He is quite gone," he said. "I cannot certify. There must be an inquest. Constable Pye is on his way. If you please, into the drawing-room, and leave the tray as it stands." Mrs. Willett flinched from the teapot as if it might resent her, and Colonel Marchmont offered his arm with gruff courtesy. The drawing-room accepted the party with correct stiffness, good cushions arranged in symmetrical hopes, a palm drooping beautifully, a clock intent on its duty. Conversation did not so much begin as take up positions. St. Mary Mead understands that information. Like jam improves when spread thinly and often. "His face was pinched," murmured Mrs. Price Ridley, who approved of severity in others. "Pinched men pinch purses." "He was her solicitor," Mr. Sampson confided to Miss Hartnell. "There's talk of muddle." "Lawyers are corsets," Miss Hartnell declared with satisfaction. "Useful to keep one upright and certain to impair breathing." Lydia stood a little apart and looked at her gloves as if they might explain themselves. "He was speaking," she said faintly, "and then he wasn't." "That can happen to any of us," Miss Hartnell returned, not uncheerfully. "My brother Geoffrey once drank tea that disagreed with him, and achieved a colour I should not recommend." Miss Marple took the least important chair and folded her hands. She did not build a theory. She assembled resemblances. Mr. Trelawney, neat and controlling, resembled a churchwarden who had once kept choir funds in his own drawer for the pleasure of handing them out. Mrs. Willett's flutter recalled the tidy panic of a woman who arranged a milk jug while receiving bad news. Lydia's upright calm was the dignity of young women who must carry their pride like thin glass. Constable Pye entered with his hat under his arm and boots polished past reason. "No one is to leave," he said, aiming at authority and striking kindness. "Inspector Slack will attend." Inspector Slack came briskly with notebook and purpose, looking as if crime ought to keep railway time. He consulted with Dr. Haydock at the threshold, then stood over the tea things like a man unfolding a map. "We will proceed in order," he said. "Who poured the deceased's tea?" "I did," said Mrs. Willett, her voice a thread. "From the new pot, milk first or last?" "First, he was particular. Sugar, 1 lump. The tongs stick." I shook them. "Who handed the cup?" "I did," said the colonel. "I was nearest. Any quarrel with the deceased?" "We were not friends," the colonel replied, "but I am unacquainted with killing by crockery." "Miss Drake?" Slack turned, pencil ready. Lydia lifted her chin. I poured for myself from the brown pot. "I prefer it strong. I did not touch Mr. Trelawney's cup. Your gloves?" "In my hand." "It was warm." "On the table?" "No," Dr. Haydock observed. "The collapse was extremely rapid. Poison." "Then," announced Miss Hartnell, pleased with the world's obedience to her expectations. Inspector Slack bent to the Wedgwood spout and sniffed, wearing the satisfaction of a fisherman who feels the line go taut. "Almond," he said. "Hydrocyanic acid often gives that whiff." A moderated horror moved round the room, as when a church door opens to a draught during a hymn. Mrs. Willett closed her eyes. The colonel's jaw discovered a straight, serviceable line. Lydia's gloves twisted until the kid creased. Miss Marple thought of the conjurer at last year's fete, who produced the expected rabbit so handsomely that no one noticed the coins sliding under a cup. She did not contradict the inspector. Labeled fear, like labeled preserves, is remarkably comforting. Slack made a neat circuit, where each had sat, who had reached for what had been said, and by whom. The tray contained both teapots, the milk jug, the sugar bowl, the tongs, 6 cups and a plate of biscuits, 2 sorts, plain and sugared. He ordered the lot taken in charge, biscuits included. The biscuits, protested Mrs. Price Ridley, affronted on behalf of pastry. People are resourceful, Slack said without humour. We will have statements now. The statements were correct, detailed, and entirely unhelpful. Mr. Sampson thought the deceased looked like a man bringing a bill. Mrs. Price Ridley believed London corrupted digestion and morals indiscriminately. The Colonel repeated that he passed the cup and touched no other. Lydia repeated that she poured from the brown pot, and that her gloves never left her hand. Miss Hartnell produced 3 theories, and withdrew 2 for reasons of taste. When he turned to Miss Marple, Slack spoke with the civility experience had wrung from him. "Well, ma'am?" "Only this," said Miss Marple. "Mr. Trelawney took sugar in his tea, and also chose a sugared biscuit. Many who sweeten their tea take a plain biscuit for balance. It struck me that he liked to feel indulged. Is that evidence?" Slack asked, polite but impatient. "No," Miss Marple said pleasantly. "It is character. Character has a way of leaving marks where dust does not." When the others were dismissed under instruction to remain within call, Miss Marple lingered by the tray before the constable shut it in its wooden prison. She pressed the sugar tongs lightly and then firmly. The hinge caught and then sprang. One corner of a lump bore a faint dullness, as if it had been lifted and set back before being taken properly. The lid of the old brown pot sat a trifle awry, the sort of neglect one affords what one trusts. New things receive ceremony. Old things service. Anything to add? Slack asked, not quite comfortable ignoring her. "Only a household truth," Miss Marple replied. "If one wished to alter tea, one might do it by cup, pot, milk, sugar, or biscuit. Each is a habit. A habit looks perfectly ordinary until it is slightly out of place. Which looks out of place to you?" "I am waiting to see which insists on being noticed," she said, and her smile made the answer sound like patience rather than evasion. She walked home in the level light, pausing to warn Tommy Pierce, wobbling along with his telegram bag, about the treacherous gravel near the smithy. At the lich gate, she met Reverend Drake, whose face had already gathered the news from the air. She told him gently what had occurred and added, "Your niece is very brave. It often steadies men to hear simple good of those they love." Her cottage received her with domestic kindness. She made a small pot, 1 spoon for the pot and 1 for herself, and set her knitting in her lap. She did not knit. Pictures form if one looks at them sideways. There was the hinge that caught. There were gloves held, not worn. There was the almond everyone embraced, because it promised an ending. There was Mrs. Willett's anxious pride, which might be guilt and might simply be housekeeping. There was Colonel Marchmont's officious kindness, so useful in emergencies and so apt to hide temper. And there was Lydia's composure, admirable, brittle, and perhaps practiced. If murder were planned at a tea-table, Miss Marple reflected, the murderer would behave like a person intent on serving tea. Women carry tiny bottles for nerves. Men keep tablets for headaches. A sugar lump accepts what is pressed upon it and shows a clean face afterward. Few eyes follow a spoon once it begins to travel. People admire the new pot and forget the old one that does the work. The church clock chimed, practical and serene. Miss Marple took an envelope and in tidy script wrote 3 names. Mrs. Willett, Colonel Marchmont, Lydia Drake. She underlined none of them. Beside the list she added, very small, tongs and brown pot. Then she put the envelope away. It is vulgar to decide before one has listened properly. After her tea she tied on a hat and stepped into the lane. She did not propose to interrogate. Questions make people tidy their thoughts, and tidied thoughts reveal nothing new. She would call on Mrs. Willett with the simple, sincere purpose of comfort. Comfort invites ordinary habits to resume, and when habits resume, now and then a thing returns to the wrong place and tells its story. The village would talk by morning. Talk bends the grass where it passes. Miss Marple, who has always read bent grass as other people read headlines, went down the lane to begin listening. The morning after the garden tea dawned deceptively bright, with sunlight pouring through the latticed windows of St. Mary Mead, as if the village itself were determined to appear unchanged. Yet a certain unease threaded its way through the lanes and hedgerows, for death had intruded, not with the distant solemnity of illness, but with the suddenness of a dropped teacup. Murder was whispered now, though not all would admit to saying the word. Some said poisoning, others foul play, and a few, still hopeful for decency, muttered about an unfortunate collapse. But the spectre of deliberate malice hovered, and everyone felt it. Miss Marple, sitting by her window with her customary knitting, listened to the faint voices drifting from the street below. Her cottage, being placed most advantageously, often served her as a kind of listening post. Tommy Pierce, the telegram boy, cycled past too fast and, in consequence, nearly collided with Mrs. Price Ridley, who took the opportunity to announce in clear tones that she had never trusted men with thin lips and watchful eyes. Miss Marple suspected she meant the late Mr. Trelawney, though Tommy, panting apologies, looked as if he feared she meant him. At the grocer's, the gossip gathered more briskly than the bread rolls. Mr. Sampson had seen with his own eyes the constable carrying away the teapot, the biscuits, and even the sugar bowl, as if no one in St. Mary Mead were trustworthy enough to bake again. Miss Hartnell insisted loudly that arsenic must have been used. Housemaids once took it for their complexion, and you can't get more ordinary than that. Mrs. Price Ridley sniffed, pointing out that almond scent suggested cyanide, not arsenic. The two ladies proceeded to argue in a manner that left bystanders both entertained and alarmed. Inspector Slack, meanwhile, had established himself at the inn with a small notebook and an air of contained impatience. He interviewed those who had not been present at the tea, including the Reverend Drake, who seemed especially distressed on behalf of his niece. "Lydia is a good girl," he repeated with a sort of pleading earnestness. "She has had trials, yes, but she has never been anything but upright. It pains me to think she should be entangled in such dreadful business." Slack, noting every word, privately reflected that such assurances were the kind one kept for people most in danger of suspicion. Colonel Marchmont had already called at the inn to declare his innocence with considerable vigour. "If you ask me, it's Willett who ought to answer questions," he proclaimed. "She poured the tea, didn't she? All this chatter about sugar and biscuits is moonshine. Poirot holds the key." Inspector Slack had thanked him with official politeness, and noted that Marchmont's hand had been the last to touch the fatal cup. Mrs. Willett, for her part, remained in her house behind closed curtains. She had sent word to her maid that she was quite shattered and would not receive callers. Naturally, this only fueled curiosity. Villagers speculated whether her grief came from shock at the solicitor's death, fear of scandal, or something darker. It was remembered that she had leaned heavily on Mr. Trelawney since her husband's passing, and more than one whispered that she might have found her dependence intolerable. Miss Marple, aware of all these murmurings, paid her visit quietly. She brought with her a small jar of quince jelly, made last autumn, and presented it as if nothing in the world were less remarkable than bringing comfort to a neighbour in distress. Mrs. Willett, pale and flustered, accepted her with nervous gratitude. "It is all so dreadful." "Miss Marple," she said, fluttering her hands at the untouched tea-tray set upon the table, as though trays themselves had become dangerous. "To think it should happen here in my own garden. I shall never sit beneath those hollyhocks again without shuddering." Miss Marple listened sympathetically, her eyes lowered as she smoothed her knitting bag. "It must indeed be a great shock. Death often comes suddenly, but seldom so dramatically. Did you know Mr. Trelawney well? As well as anyone might know a solicitor, Mrs. Willett replied with a nervous laugh. He was kind enough in his way, but, oh, how shall I put it? A little particular. He always insisted that my accounts be checked, that I follow his instructions precisely. At times it seemed almost as though he did not trust me. Of course, one can hardly be surprised. Men are like that with women. Miss Marple looked thoughtful. I always think, she murmured, that people who are over-particular about small things are often careless about something larger. One grows suspicious, you know. Mrs. Willett shifted uneasily and then leaned forward in sudden earnestness. You do not believe, Miss Marple, that anyone supposes I— That is, the inspector seemed to look at me so very directly when he asked about the teapot. I assure you I did nothing unusual. I poured as I always pour, only— She hesitated. Only? The sugar tongs caught, as they often do. I shook them and the lump fell. Perhaps it was clumsy. I remember it now because they asked. She wrung her hands. But I swear, Miss Marple, I never added anything to that sugar. Miss Marple touched her arm kindly. My dear, I am sure you did exactly what any hostess would. People notice trifles most when they are frightened. The inspector will no doubt sort matters out. When she left, Miss Marple did not walk directly home. Instead, she took the longer way by the vicarage, where she encountered Lydia in the garden, pruning roses with unnecessary energy. Lydia looked up, her expression tight. Everyone is talking, I suppose, she said without preamble. There is always talk, Miss Marple agreed gently. It is the way people manage fear, by giving it words. Lydia's hand trembled slightly on the secateurs. They will think I had something to do with it. Because I sat apart, because I wasn't smiling and laughing like the rest. You were thoughtful, my dear, which is sometimes mistaken for guilt. One mustn't worry about appearances too much. Still, one wonders. Did you know Mr. Trelawney well? Her mouth tightened. He was my uncle's solicitor. He made himself too important, always prying, always hinting. I disliked him, yes, but disliking a man does not mean one would poison him. Indeed not, Miss Marple said. It is often the people who show dislike openly who are least likely to commit such acts. One must pay closer attention to those who smile too readily. Lydia looked at her quickly, then lowered her gaze. Do you think the inspector will arrest someone soon? Miss Marple's needles clicked faintly in her bag. The police are inclined to look for the simplest explanation, but life, my dear, is rarely simple. Still, it is wise to tell them everything one remembers. Even trifles. Lydia nodded, though she did not look comforted. That evening, word spread that Inspector Slack had taken statements to the county town and sent certain items to be examined. Yet the gossip did not cease, it intensified. At the post office, Mrs. Price Ridley declared she had seen Colonel Marchmont slip something into his pocket at the tea, though whether it was a handkerchief or a packet she could not say. At the same time, Miss Hartnell was convinced that Lydia had flushed crimson when Mr. Trelawney spoke of pressing business, which surely indicated some scandal. And Mr. Sampson, remembering Mrs. Willett's nervousness, hinted broadly that women of her temperament often did things in a fit of hysteria they later regretted. Miss Marple absorbed all of it, as the earth absorbs the rain, storing it until patterns might emerge. She reflected on the smallness of the village, how each person's life intersected with the others in 100 minor ways. Mr. Trelawney, disliked though he was, had touched many households with his accounts and advice. Money, wills, and inheritances. These had a way of stirring hidden resentments, especially where appearances of respectability must be kept. Late that night, as she set aside her knitting and prepared for bed, Miss Marple thought again of the almond scent, so conveniently observed. Poison, yes, but also something too obvious, too pat. Murderers rarely wish to advertise their method. And then there was the sugar tong sticking just at the wrong moment. Little things, trifles. Yet trifles, she knew, were often the beginning of truth. She blew out her lamp, the village lying hushed beneath its blanket of stars, and thought, with calm certainty, that before long another clue would present itself, as naturally as a weed appearing in a neat flower bed. And when it did, she would be ready to notice what others dismissed, for it was in such small betrayals of habit that human nature revealed its secrets, and Jane Marple never failed to notice. Inspector Slack came back to St. Mary Mead after luncheon with a walk that told the village he had brought answers, or would force them out. He went first to Mrs. Willet's. 5 minutes later he emerged, notebook shut as tightly as his mouth, and crossed to the vicarage. Miss Marple, carrying a modest basket, and the air of one whose errands always align with Providence, intercepted him by the green. "Good afternoon, Inspector." "The gooseberries have escaped mildew." "Excellent," Slack said, eyeing the basket briefly. "I have asked Mrs. Willett to remain in the village. Routine. Miss Drake likewise. She was early yesterday to help with the tables and was alone for several minutes. People left alone tidy what does not require tidying," Miss Marple said. "Flowers are seldom improved by it." Slack hesitated, then yielded a scrap. "Report from the county. Hydrocyanic acid on 1 cup and saucer, and on crumbs of a sugared biscuit taken from that plate. Nothing on the pots or milk. The sugar bowl gives a doubtful trace on a single lump. The tongs are inconclusive. It looks prepared for the deceased alone." "A personal portion," Miss Marple murmured. "Like saving the best cherry or the worst for someone." Slack nodded toward the green where Tommy Pierce pedalled solemnly. "The deceased carried drafts calling in loans. Marchment Drake Willett. He liked his clients to feel it," Slack went on, his boots keeping time with his thoughts. Miss Marple, after delivering her basket to Miss Fowler's sister, turned into the grocer's. Mr. Sampson, erecting a sugar pyramid with care, brightened at the sight of a listener. "The inspector took my ledger as if I weighed out homicides," he confided. "Wants to know how many boxes of lumps went to Mrs. Willett." "It is always wise," Miss Marple said, "to know what one has bought." "You supplied lumps for the tea?" "2 boxes Thursday. Same as always, white with a little crown stamped on top." He shook a few into a scoop. "People like a pattern." The stamp was shallow. 1 cube showed a faint smear as though pinched by damp fingers. "Any other purchases of sugar?" "Colonel Marchmont took a small packet yesterday morning. Keeps a tray in his study. Miss Drake bought only candles and thread. Willett's maid was in for napkins and lemon." "Lemon calms the conscience," Miss Marple said, smiling, and went out. At the vicarage gate Lydia spoke with Slack, chin high, gloves absent at last. Miss Marple drew near as one more breeze among many. "I arrived early," Lydia said before she was asked. "I laid plates and set the biscuits. Sugared to the left, plain to the right. I fetched flowers. I did not touch the sugar bowl. I do not take sugar. You left the table for the flowers?" Slack asked. "For a few minutes." Slack closed his notebook with a soft, satisfied click and moved away. Lydia watched him go and then turned on a little gasp. "He thinks opportunity is guilt." "Opportunity is a very sociable thing," Miss Marple said. "It visits many people. Did Mr. Trelawney speak to you yesterday?" "He reminded me that my uncle must answer by Friday, and that delay would aggravate the matter. He enjoyed saying that." "Deadlines make people hasty," Miss Marple observed, and left her with a touch that was comfort without promise. Her feet, obeying a plan that looked like none, carried her to Colonel Marchmont's. He came out at once, all square shoulders and affronted virtue. "If Slack imagines I poisoned the man because I owed him money," he began, "he can imagine me sprouting wings next. Trelawney lent when a man was down, and then pressed until the bones showed. He sent me a note yesterday to say he meant to speak to Willett in public. He had a taste for spectators." "Spectators mislead," Miss Marple said, glancing past him. On a side table stood a little glass bowl of sugar lumps under a paper doily. The topmost showed the stamp hollowed a trifle more deeply than its fellows, as if something had kissed and gone. She looked away before the Colonel could follow her gaze. "You keep a tray?" "Whiskey rather than tea," he grunted, But I took a packet of lumps yesterday morning. Habit. Habit is an excellent alibi until it trips, Miss Marple said, and let him march her to the gate with talk of markets and honour. Evening gathered neatly over the village. Miss Marple sat by her window with her knitting unregarded, and let the small movements reassemble themselves. A hostess pouring, a guest receiving, tongs that caught, a sugared biscuit taken in the same hand that lifted the cup. She thought of the old brown pot whose lid sat comfortably askew, and of the new Wedgwood that demanded attention. People fuss over new things and trust old ones. A murderer may use either truth. At 9 there came a step on her path. Lydia stood there pale but composed by effort. "My uncle found this pushed under our door," she said, handing a cheap sheet. "I begged him to let me bring it to you." He would blurt, "You will not." The letter, written in a hand that prided itself on control, read, "Reverend Drake, you will pay what is owed by Friday, or I shall make public that monies intended for parish relief were applied otherwise. Spare yourself the embarrassment, and your niece the consequences attendant on scandal." Miss Marple's finger rested on the word. "Otherwise," she repeated, "a word that says very little and intends a great deal. Your uncle borrowed from the fund to patch the roof." "After the winter storm," Lydia whispered. "He meant to replace it from the Easter collections." The need was real. Trelawney threatened to call it theft. "My uncle would have been ruined." "But he did not kill him." "No," said Miss Marple with a certainty that steadied the girl. "Your uncle does nothing suddenly. He repents well in advance and so avoids the sin." "Then who?" "Someone who understands trays," Miss Marple said. "Someone who knows indulgence is consistent. A man who takes sugar will accept a sugared biscuit too. Someone with a moment before the tea began to attend to both plates and bowl. One portion could be sweetened twice." Lydia stared. "You think it was the biscuits?" "I think," Miss Marple said, "that people like the taste of their own habits. And I think the neatness of almond is a little too obliging. When murder announces its flavour, it is often offering a screen." Lydia looked down at her empty hands as if surprised not to find the gloves there. "Will you tell the inspector?" "Presently," Miss Marple said. "First I will ask Mrs. Willett to show me how one pours properly from a new pot. When people teach you, they forget to conceal themselves." A small wind went through the roses. The village listened without knowing it listened still. Miss Marple saw in her mind the sugar tongs catching, the slight smear on a cube, the deeper hollow on a stamped crown. She drew the curtain half an inch and let the night settle. Quietly, patiently, watchfully. Morning, she knew, would move the pattern again, and she intended to be looking where others did not. There. The next morning, Miss Marple presented herself at Martha Willett's door with a small parcel and a smile that made the visit feel like the house's own idea. Elsie the maid admitted her. Mrs. Willett, in pale blue, received the older lady as if a sensible guest might, by rearranging cushions, restore the past to a kinder shape. "I have come," Miss Marple said, "to confess ignorance. New teapots alarm me. Would you show me your method?" Instructions steadied Mrs. Willett. In the breakfast room the Wedgwood sat beside the plain brown pot. On a plate lay 2 kinds of biscuits, sugared and plain. Mrs. Willett began. "One warms the pot and tips, not pours. Milk first for some. The tongs are tiresome, but if you press and shake they obey." She demonstrated. The hinge caught. She shook. The cube fell. "And biscuits?" Miss Marple asked. "Sugared for those who like a treat. Colonel Marchmont always takes one. Mr. Trelawney took sugar and sugar. Miss Drake ate nothing. On the day itself, who set the tray before guests arrived?" "I did. Well, I directed Elsie. Miss Drake helped with plates. I went to cut flowers. It was hot. I thought the icing would weep. And the sugar tongs, did they catch then?" "They always stick," Mrs. Willett said. "I have meant to have them mended." Miss Marple praised the poor and left. In truth, she had learned 3 things. The shake with the tongs was unconscious, the sugared biscuits were expected, and there was a window of solitude between setting and serving. In the lane she met Tommy Pierce, who halted so sharply his bicycle wobbled. "Beg pardon, miss." "You are forgiven," she said. "Many telegrams yesterday?" "2," he said, then brightened. "And a note from town I carried from the station for Colonel Marchmont. I gave it him by Mrs. Willet's side gate. So early. 10:30. The Colonel came out of the back garden with his hat off. Said he was taking a turn while Mrs. Willet looked to her roses. Mind the gravel, Miss Marple said. Her thoughts settled. Early at the side gate. A new packet of sugar bought that morning. A man who liked to be seen hearty and resented dunning. The pattern had a shape but not yet a seam. At the grocer's, Mr. Sampson produced a paper packet with a flourish. The sugar the Colonel purchased, crown-stamped. He tipped out cubes. The stamps were crisp. On one the crown looked faintly hollowed, as if something had briefly kissed and gone. "Your boy packs these?" Miss Marple asked. "I do it myself," he said. "I'd notice any medal." "I'm sure you would," she said. Certain any medal had been done after the cubes left his shop. By afternoon, Inspector Slack had the principal witnesses at the inn. Dr. Haydock sat. Colonel Marchmont arrived square. Mrs. Willet came pale. Lydia, making bravery without gloves, took a chair by the window. Slack laid a copy of the letter to Reverend Drake on the table. The deceased was pressing debts. The Reverend borrowed from parish funds. The deceased meant to make it public. Miss Marple thought of the word otherwise. "Words are like hats," she said mildly. Mr. Trelawney liked otherwise. Notice who echoes a man and who translates him. Slack questioned Marchmont first. The Colonel admitted the loan, the pressure, and the meeting by the side gate. "If I had intended worse, I wouldn't choose a gooseberry bush for a witness. Where were you when the tray was set?" Slack asked. "In the garden speaking to the maid," he said after a second, too careful. "About soldiers. She has a brother serving. Mrs. Willet said she had gone for flowers. Elsie carried the tray. Lydia arranged plates and biscuits. It was all so ordinary." "Ordinary is the safest place to hide," Miss Marple observed. Lydia added one small thing. "I set the sugared biscuits to the left. I always do. When we sat down they were at the right. Who changed them?" Slack demanded. "No one I saw." Miss Marple considered the table as a stage. A hand, alone for a minute, could reverse a plate and in the same movement attend to the sugar. A shallow hollow in a crown stamp. A dusting upon sugared biscuits concealed by icing. A thrifty murderer, knowing Mr. Trelawney's fondness, might make 2 invitations to the same death. Dr. Haydock said, "You have thought of something. Murderers prefer to finish beforehand," she said. "At busy tables hands shake. In solitude they do not." Slack dismissed the others and detained Miss Marple. "You don't think much of my almond." "It is true and convenient," she replied. "It gives everyone an answer to carry. And what do you say?" "That someone prepared a personal portion, perhaps 2, in expectation of a habit. That the person was early and felt at home with trays. That later they were seen being helpful." She paused. "You will want to speak to Elsie again, kindly. People who are frightened move things without knowing why." Miss Marple walked home, opened her parcel, and took out sugar tongs she had borrowed years ago, plain, obedient with a hinge that did not catch. She set them beside a bowl of crown-stamped cubes, and with a hairpin made the slightest hollow in one stamp. It could be done in a breath and look like nothing. On a small card she wrote, "Early at side gate, plates reversed, hollow crown." Then she added, "Elsie's soldier brother." A timid knock came. Elsie stood on the step with cheeks blotched from haste. "Please, ma'am," she blurted, "I didn't do nothing wicked, but I moved the plate." "Come in," Miss Marple said. "Tell me when and why." "When I carried the tray," Elsie whispered. "The Colonel was by the side path and gives me a shilling for my brother. Then Mrs. Willet called for flowers, and Miss Drake asked where to put the plates, and I seen the sugared biscuits catching sun, so I swapped them to the shade, right-hand side. I never touched the sugar bowl. Only the plate." "You did a sensible thing," Miss Marple said. Did the Colonel touch the tray? He lifted the corner to set his shilling under it, Elsie said. Thank you. When the girl had gone, Miss Marple stood still. The seam had shown itself. A man who liked control would not trust chance. He would provide 2 chances, and then create a reason to be near the tray without seeming near it. A shilling under a tray is a joke. A courtesy is an alibi. A compliment to a maid is an errand no one begrudges. And a moment alone earlier by the side gate is an invitation to prepare. She wrote one more line, shilling under tray. The next step would be to let the inspector discover that neatness with a guiding remark at the right time. People who dislike creases will show their temper at the wrong crease. Then one sees them. Evening settled. Miss Marple lit her lamp and threaded her needle, content to wait. Murder, like poor housekeeping, cannot abide patience. Sooner or later it leaves a smear on the best china. Inspector Slack arrived at Miss Marple's gate just after breakfast, his notebook tucked beneath his arm, and his expression suggesting that the case had resolved itself overnight. Miss Marple, who understood that truth seldom travelled so directly, invited him to the sitting room. She poured tea with her plain pot and offered currant buns. I have spoken again to Elsie, Slack began. She swapped the biscuit plates for shade. No harm there. But she also says Marchmont tucked a coin under the edge of the tray. Why, to be remembered as generous, Miss Marple said. It is a habit with some men, like straightening pictures. The coin calls attention back to the table later, when it can be found with a flourish. A flourish provides an innocent reason to touch what one has already touched. Slack's pencil paused. You think Marchmont prepared a portion in advance. But how? We found nothing on the pots. The sugar bowl shows a doubtful trace on a single lump. The biscuits, yes, crumbs with cyanide. Why both? Belts and braces, Miss Marple said mildly. If either invitation failed, the other might succeed. Mr. Trelawney indulged himself. People who indulge will repeat the pattern. The coin under the tray, Elsie swears to it. I can challenge him on that. You may, Miss Marple said, but not yet. A man who values composure shows himself when it is disturbed. Ask first about smaller matters. His morning walk, his new packet of sugar. Leave the coin until his temper thinks itself safe. Slack nodded. Another thread. The coroner notes a shiny fleck on one biscuit, varnish like a glaze. Kitchen says they glazed none. An amateur touch, Miss Marple murmured. The smear to hold a dusting in place. A knock interrupted them. Reverend Drake entered hastily. Inspector, Miss Marple, my niece has received a note. He held out an envelope addressed in a meticulous hand. Inside, on the same cheap paper as before, were 4 words, Friday or the parish suffers. Posted in town last night, Slack said. We may trace the counter. The deceased is beyond posting, the Reverend said miserably. Who now sends these threats? Someone who benefits from fear, Miss Marple said gently. Found someone who knows the handwriting well enough to mimic its neatness. Slack pocketed the envelope. We'll have the postmistress look at this. Meanwhile, I'll see Marchmont. They found the colonel trimming his privet, as if the hedge had offended regimental regulations. He acknowledged them with a curt nod. Colonel, Slack said conversationally, curious detail, did you buy sugar yesterday morning? I did, habit. You keep a tray? I keep whatever I please. Marchmont's jaw worked. If you've come to say I poisoned that fellow, say it and be done. Where were you between 10:30 and 11? In the back garden, he said at once. I spoke with the maid. I gave her a shilling for her brother. I took a turn to cool my temper. Then I returned through the side gate, and the coin beneath the tray. Slack asked abruptly. Marchmont blinked. What coin? The one you slid under the edge. I did nothing of the sort. Miss Marple's voice drifted in softly. It was kind, Colonel, to think of the boy. Some men forget the young when they are worried. Worried? He snapped. If by worried you mean hounded, yes. That man, dash him, hounded honest men. I told him so. You told him so where? Slack's pencil hovered. In the garden before the other guests arrived. He'd come early, confound him, to ensure an audience when he chose to make his point. He said he would speak to Mrs. Willett publicly. I told him to show decency. When they had gone, Slack exhaled. He lies badly, but he lies. He lies about the coin, Miss Marple said. Whether he lies about murder remains to be seen. Consider, Inspector, a man who cannot bear humiliation might arrange to avoid it. But he would also arrange noise, Mr. Trelawney's death silences as well as shames. Slack grimaced. I'll have the tongs looked at again, and I'll speak to the postmistress about that letter. The postmistress recollected a gentleman of military bearing buying a single stamp after closing bell. Slack accepted the information without triumph. By late afternoon, St. Mary Mead offered up a second oddity. Mr. Sampson sent for Slack in agitation. Someone's been at my sugar shelf. They examined it together. A small spill of loose grains lay like frost beside the box of crown-stamped cubes. Slack looked murderous. Miss Marple looked thoughtful. Have you a clerk? She asked. My wife, he said, affronted, and she minds her business. Indeed, said Miss Marple. Then whoever meddled felt at home enough to lean across the counter, or small enough to slip under. Tommy Pierce fetched reluctantly, swore he had touched nothing, and his ears went scarlet. Miss Marple believed him. Guilt in boys is noisy, not scarlet. That evening, Lydia came to Miss Marple with a fresh tremor beneath the composure. Inspector Slack says I had opportunity. He is right, but I did not. I know, Miss Marple said. How? Because your anger at Mr. Trelawney is clean. It looks forward, to relief, rather than backward to concealment. Murder is domestic. It tidies after itself. Domestic? Like mending a hem. One tucks the frayed edge and pretends it was always neat. At dusk, Miss Marple took a slow turn past Mrs. Willett's. Through the open kitchen window, she saw Elsie polishing the sugar tongs patiently. The hinge caught. Elsie winced. A tiny spot of blood stained the cloth. Miss Marple knocked and asked for a glass of water. While Elsie fetched it, she glanced at the cloth. The blood drop made a neat punctuation on the linen. When Elsie returned, Miss Marple admired the girl's diligence and advised a dab of cold water for the stain. It comes away better if you begin at once, she said. Does it, ma'am? Elsie asked, hopeful. Oh, yes, said Miss Marple, thinking not of linen. She went home and sat with her knitting until the clock gave up its last chime. The case, she thought, had moved from arrangement to rehearsal. Someone was trying the edges of things, shelves, stamps, stories to see which would tear first. Tomorrow, when the pattern shifted again, it would be time to set a small trap, not a net which alarms, but a loop of thread one hardly feels until it tightens. She wrote a short note to Inspector Slack. Please invite all concerned to tea at the vicarage tomorrow. Ask Lydia to pour. Place the sugared biscuits where the sun will catch them. Announce that you have traced the threatening letters to their writer. Watch who protects the tray. Then she put out her light. In the darkness she saw the white crown on a sugar lump and the shallow kiss in its top. She saw a shilling winking beneath a tray, and a hand that liked to be seen rescuing it. She saw, too, the neat word otherwise, copied with devotion by a mind that believed neatness could make a lie true. Human nature, she reminded herself gently, cannot be polished into innocence. It betrays itself at the joints. The vicarage drawing-room wore its modest respectability like a brushed coat. Lydia set the tray on the low table and, at Miss Marple's suggestion, placed the borrowed Wedgwood teapot to the left, the old brown pot to the right. The sugared biscuits sat nearest the sunlit corner. The plain plate lived in shade. Reverend Drake hovered at the casement, opening and shutting it as if air might steady morals. Inspector Slack stood by the mantel with official ease. Miss Marple took the chair that had already learned her shape and folded her hands as if waiting for a hymn. Guests arrived with the air of people attending a lecture they preferred to skip. Mrs. Willett came first, settled by effort, a fan occupying her hands. Colonel Marchmont followed, polished into geniality. Dr. Haydock entered with practical gloom. Elsie, promoted to assist, hovered brave and pale. Slack had also invited Mr. Sampson. An honest witness is as useful as a yardstick. "Thank you for coming," Reverend Drake said. "Lydia, my dear," Lydia poured. She moved without embroidery. Milk first for the vicar, none for Slack, 2 lumps for Doctor. Haydock, careful measure for Mrs. Willett, no eye contact for the Colonel. Conversation walked primly. Weather, parish roses, the fates raffle. Slack let the room warm, then cleared his throat. "We've traced the threatening letters," he said with studied lightness. "The postmistress recalls both late postings. The handwriting copies Mr. Trelawney but carries a Sandhurst flourish in the capital R." "Curious, Colonel," Marchmont coloured. "If you mean to call me a mischief-maker, I mean we are narrowing," Slack replied. "Also curious. The first note posted by a lady purchasing penny stamps and using 3d. The envelope shows lavender starch, common in some laundries. Nearness, not guilt." As nearness settled, 2 movements nicked the air. Colonel Marchmont stepped forward as if to relieve Lydia of the tongs. "Mrs." Willett leaned, quick and competent, to slide the sugared biscuits out of the sun. "Dear Mrs. Willett," Miss Marple said, a thread through silk, "pray leave them." The motion stopped like a clock at the hour. Lydia's hand hovered, Slack's eyelids lowered. "Doctor, Haydock's mouth approved. It is warm," Mrs. Willett protested. "The icing will behave," Dr. Haydock said. Miss Marple's eyes rested on the sugar bowl. A lump near the top had tilted, the stamped crown faintly hollowed. The recently oiled tongs lay across the rim with an air of injured innocence. "Lydia," Miss Marple said, "offer only the plain biscuits." No one accepted. Even Dr. Haydock, who had claimed sugar as medicine, found abstinence therapeutic. "Inspector," Miss Marple continued, "the letters." Slack kept the tray in sight. The letters were leverage. Someone wished fear to outlive the solicitor. Imitation requires anonymity. Posting late assists. But we are here for habits. Mr. Trelawney indulged himself. Sweet tea and sugared biscuit. Whoever planned his death prepared 2 invitations. A sugared biscuit given a whisper that would cling, and a single lump whose crown was hollowed for a smear, not noticed when tongs are known to catch. Mrs. Willett's fan closed. "You will not accuse me for keeping a proper table." "No one accuses you for that," Miss Marple said, kind as aired linen. "Your carefulness is admirable, and it gives others opportunity. One cannot fetch flowers, shift plates, rescue icing, and guard a tray at once." Marchmont's jaw set. "You suggest I meddled among the cups?" "I suggest," Miss Marple said, "that you had motive and a taste for flourish. The coin slipped under the tray so you might later find it, with a hand conveniently near. You had time by the side gate and a new packet of lumps. You also have noise in you. Poison is quiet." He made a harsh sound that was neither assent nor denial. Miss Marple turned to Mrs. Willett. "There is another sort of preparation. Domestic, patient, invisible. Toothache drops can be bought anywhere. Their scent supplies an explanation. A woman pouring at her own table might just once prepare a lump in her dressing room where her hands do not shake, then, seized by tidiness, slide the sugared plate and ensure the arranged lump stands ready when the tongs catch." Lydia flinched for her. Reverend Drake murmured a prayer that had escaped. Mrs. Willett met Miss Marple's gaze levelly. "If I were that woman," she said very low, "I should not have failed." The past tense moved round the room, like a draught under a door. Slack stepped to the table. "We'll examine the lump and the plate," he said. "We'll also look at the Colonel's sugar and Mrs. Willett's dressing table. Doctor, take any bottles that smell of almonds. Dr. Haydock nodded. Better me than fools. Mrs. Willet's shoulders lowered an inch, not collapsing, only setting down what the fan had disguised. I have nerve drops, she said. Most women do. And most women, Miss Marple answered, do not put them in sugar. Colonel Marchmont flung a hand. Intolerable. I went early to tell Trelawney to keep his business out of her garden. If he ended dead, it was his own unpleasantness. That begins murder, Miss Marple said, but seldom arranges it. Slack lifted the sugar bowl with the care due a relic. No one touches the tray, he said. We'll measure the crown with instruments, not eyeballs. They broke up more sober than they had come. Mr. Sampson withdrew, looking personally insulted by wickedness. Elsie helped Mrs. Willet along, the passage whispering, "I'm here, ma'am," like a rope across a stream. The colonel left as if keeping time to an unheard march. Dr. Haydock buttoned his coat as though fastenings might steady truth. Outside, Lydia caught Miss Marple's sleeve. "Is it settled?" "Truth rarely settles on the first perch," Miss Marple said. "But it knows where it is wanted. We have set seed." Lydia glanced back at the bright square of sun on the carpet. "For a moment I thought she would faint." "She nearly did," Miss Marple said. "When one has done a dreadful thing, or contemplated it closely, the body rehearses collapse." "Terses, then you think—" "I think 2 preparations were made," Miss Marple answered. "One by a man who hoped to be applauded while intervening, one by a woman who hoped no one would ever know she had intervened at all. One succeeded. The instruments will tell us which agrees with human nature." The parish bell sounded the quarter. Neither rescue nor doom, only time. "Go home," Miss Marple said. "Tell your uncle to sit with his flowers. Fear is bravest when it is busy. And you?" "Oh," said Miss Marple, as if the notion had just occurred. "I shall ask Mr. Sampson how many packets of crown-stamped sugar he has sold after hours this week. Money people remember. Time remembers them." She took the lane where the hedges met like conspirators, and let the village speak in its small signs. A curtain twitched at Mrs. Price Ridley's. A rake leaned at the colonel's gate. A bicycle track scalloped the dust by the side path. By the grocer's window, Mr. Sampson chalked up lemons and paused, remembering something, and then not. Miss Marple noted each trifle, storing them as a thrifty housekeeper saves string. Presently the string would tie itself. Presently a hand would tug, and the parcel would open. The afternoon lay over St. Mary Mead with a polished calm that fooled no one. Miss Marple kept to her errand, to let people remember. At the grocer's she admired lemons, until Mr. Sampson recalled what mattered. After hours a gentleman bought a single stamp and tapped it on the counter, the colonel, and a lady earlier purchased lavender starch, needles, and a little clear varnish. His wife stocks it to seal envelopes when the post is damp. "Very thoughtful of her," Miss Marple said. At the chemist's, Mr. Pettigrew confirmed 2 sales of toothache drops, Mrs. Willet yesterday, and a bottle of clear nail varnish for a lady's emergency, which his eyes, before he caught them, sent toward Mrs. Willet's lane. "Emergencies are often planned," Miss Marple murmured, and went home to find Inspector Slack waiting. He carried the satisfaction of a man who had found more than he expected. "Her dressing table is a museum," he reported. "Nerve drops, toothache drops, and a square of blotting paper that smells of almonds. Also a saucer dusted with fine sugar under the powder box." "Aunts are fond of sugar," Miss Marple said. "They seldom visit powder puffs." "We also found at Marchmont's a packet with 1 cube indented at the crown, and a faint tang on his tongs. And this, under the vicarage mat. Same paper as the threats. Same hand almost. The capital R has lost its swagger." "You have laid out 2 roads," Miss Marple said. "One frequented by women." "Which?" "Sealing sweetness with a smear of varnish," she returned. "Kitchens don't stock varnish. Dressing tables do. We can't arrest a habit." "No, but a habit points toward the drawer." Before she could pour, Tommy Pierce came like wind. "Inspector, a window's broke at the inn, the little one. Someone nipped through the yard. Slack was down the path. Miss Marple followed. At the inn, a broken pane lay like sugar on the sill. In the parlour cupboard, the tray had shifted. Bowl astray, plate edged forward. Lydia stood white with an envelope crushed in her hand. "I came for my uncle's letter," she said. "I couldn't bear it lying for anyone to gawk at. I didn't touch the tray." "Lord save me from conscientious women," Slack muttered, not unkindly. The landlady recalled that moments before the crash, a biggish gentleman asked for the back way and walked angry. Miss Marple looked at the tray. The sugar bowl had turned a quarter, bringing a cube with a shallow crown neat to the rim. "Lydia did not do that," she said quietly. "When one is ashamed, one sees only the shame." By evening, Dr. Haydock arrived with his results. The shiny fleck on the biscuit is varnish, cheap and clear. None on Willet's kitchen brushes. Plenty on a little bottle on her dressing table. One cube from her bowl shows a sticky trace that isn't sugar. Marchmont's tongs have a ghost of the same. "Ghosts aren't bodies," Slack said savagely, then sighed. "But I'll take them." Miss Marple listened as if to rain. A woman smoothed the invitation that worked. A man arranged a flourish for the one he hoped to direct. Two schemes, not in pact but in parallel. "They touch at a corpse," Slack returned. "They do. Which stream arrived first?" Mr. Trelawney took a sugared biscuit at once, and a sip of tea while he spoke. The biscuit would act sooner. Slack rubbed his chin. "And the letters?" "To keep the Reverend malleable," Miss Marple said. "A man with debts and temper profits by fear. A woman having done the thing avoids writing at all." Slack rose. "I'll see Marchmont." The colonel in his study looked as if order might ward off fate. The glass bowl of crown-stamped sugar inhabited its place like a small monument. "We've had enough parades," Slack said. "Did you go by the inn just now?" "I did not," Marchmont snapped. "I've nothing to do with your cupboards. You bought a stamp after hours and tapped it on the counter. That is no crime. You left a shilling under a tray, a courtesy, and you indented a crown so a smear would lodge, for—" The first time he faltered. "What in blazes?" "The habit of control," Slack said. "If you alone had poisoned him, you'd have rescued the cup from clumsy hands. But you were forestalled. He bit a biscuit and died before your theatre began." Marchmont's fist struck the desk. "Then why in God's name am I here?" "Because you mimicked his hand to keep pressure on the vicar," Slack said. "Because you meddled at the inn door. A man who cannot let go of any advantage is dangerous, even when he fails. Stay at home. In the morning we'll speak again." He left the colonel with rage that looked older than debt and met Miss Marple in the dusk. "He will not sleep," she said. "Let him toss. Time for Mrs. Willet." They found her in her dim drawing-room with the windows open to roses, the fan idle. "I thought you would come," she said. "When people have done something irreparable, they expect callers." "Dr. Haydock has matched varnish on a biscuit to a bottle on your dressing table," Slack said. "Yes," she answered. "I painted a crack in a saucer last week. I foolishly left the bottle uncorked, and the sugar beneath the powder. I was saving it from ants," she said with a small, tired smile. "Women are always saving something." Miss Marple's voice was very gentle. "Were you saving yourself, Mrs. Willet?" She opened her hands. "I was saving my house. He meant to say at my tea that my husband had mismanaged everything, and that he, Mr. Trelawney, had arranged matters so I might keep the roof so long as I kept quiet. He meant to parade me, grateful. I could have borne poverty. I could not bear him. So you chose murder for embroidery," Slack said. "I chose to stop him," she answered, exhausted rather than defiant. Miss Marple waited. "You did not choose all at once. You chose by degrees, drops for nerve, a little varnish, noticing how a lump sits in the tongs. Then one day you saw the pattern finished. Neatness betrays." A sound came from the hall, Elsie's stifled cry. She had been there, it seemed, all along. Now she rushed in. "Don't take her, sir. It was me swapped the biscuits to shade. It was me." "Hush, dear," Miss Marple said, gathering the girl with a kindness that made space for truth. "Good maids keep icing from weeping. You did not paint it," Slack looked at Mrs. Willett. "You will come to the station in the morning," she nodded. "Yes, Inspector." On the path the air smelled of cut privet and roses and something sterner. "The biscuit first," Slack said. "Human nature is punctual when pride is pricked," Miss Marple replied. "There remains the letters." "I'll see Marchmont prefers a lesser sin confessed to a greater," Slack said. "Men like him often do. And Lydia?" "She has done one foolish thing publicly," Slack said, surprising himself with gentleness. "The village will forgive her by tea-time." "Foolishness is the most acceptable innocence," Miss Marple said, looking back at the Willett windows where lights pricked like pins along a hem. "Tomorrow will be untidy at first, then it will be neat again." Truly, dawn came blunt and workmanlike, expecting hedges clipped and floors scrubbed. It found St. Mary Mead tidying its shock, and Miss Marple at her table writing 2 notes, one to Inspector Slack, one to Martha Willett. In each she asked a courtesy, different, and neither looked like a test. Slack arrived before 9, carrying a fatigue that refused to call itself worry. "Haydock's report will let a magistrate commit," he said. "Willett this morning. Marchmont after lunch for the letters and the tampering." Miss Marple poured tea and set one plain biscuit in shade. "You will want more than committing," she said. "You will want understanding." He accepted that like medicine. "What do you want from me?" "A search of Mr. Trelawney's briefcase. He makes threats like a man who files them. Also, leave the Colonel an hour at the inn parlour with the tray and the coin. Men who cannot resist will not resist, and will it. Ask her to bring the bottle of clear varnish to the station herself. Also ask whether Mr. Trelawney preferred his sugared biscuit before the first sip or after. She will answer. Either way, the answer will know itself." When he had gone, Miss Marple walked to the vicarage. Lydia opened the door. "Is it decided?" "Truth seldom hurries," Miss Marple said. "It keeps appointments." Reverend Drake joined them. On the table lay the 2 letters. Beside them, his sermon and a notice about the roof. Miss Marple touched the envelopes. "On Sunday you must say what happened with the relief fund and precisely how you repaid it." The vicar went white and then pink. Lydia said, "Must he humiliate himself?" "Humiliation-born cleans a place," Miss Marple said, "and it removes a motive that does not belong to you." On her way out she paused by the cupboard where the church china lived. A wheaten plate showed a hairline mended with a faint smear that caught the light. She thought of Martha Willett's dressing table and kept her counsel. At the inn, Slack met her. Briefcase contained copies of 3 letters, including the threat to the vicar, plus a memorandum. "At Willett's tea declare terms. Public gratitude is cheap." Also a list of clients who owe. And at the tray. The Colonel couldn't leave it alone. He fetched the shilling from under the edge with a flourish and told the landlady to keep accounts better. Then he set himself to see both door and tray. "Men like that hate a stage without an audience," Miss Marple said. "Has Martha Willett come?" "She will bring the bottle at 11. At 10:30, Miss Marple went by Mrs. Willett's side gate. Beds had been improved, stiff stakes, a straightened border. The maid aired carpets. Martha came out with the bottle in one hand and the fan in the other. "You would have me bring this," she said. "I would have you bring yourself," Miss Marple replied. "The bottle is only a habit in glass." Martha stood. "If a woman has done something fearful in a sudden, foolish second, it was not sudden," Miss Marple said. "Women's wickedness is long-stitched. You prepared a biscuit, perhaps 2, because you could not bear to be paraded thankful. You told yourself it was merely to have by you. And when the moment came—" "I did not hand it to him," Martha said. I smiled. "I planned 100 times and then I did not. He helped himself?" "He always did. Sugared biscuit first, always, then a sip to wash it." "Thank you," Miss Marple said. "That is all." She walked back to the inn. Slack said, "Willett has come." She put the bottle on my desk and confirmed the order. "Biscuit first, then consider mercy," Miss Marple said quietly. "Not forgiveness. Law is not a chapel, but mercy in how you ask and how you write." Colonel Marchmont arrived at the station. Slack showed him the copied letters. He denounced forgery. Slack asked why the capital R boasted a military tail in the threats, and only sometimes in the colonel's hand. The postmistress's memory clinked. "You do not wish to be charged with murder," Slack said. "Nor need I charge you with it to hold you for uttering threats and attempting to tamper with evidence. Choose the lesser, Doc." Marchmont looked at Miss Marple as if she had betrayed some drill. He humiliated decent men. He strutted. He liked women grateful. "Yes," Miss Marple said. "And yet here we are discussing your letters," he sagged. "I wrote them. I posted them. And I, may God forgive me, prepared a cube. I meant to snatch the cup and play the noble, but the devil outran me and wore pale blue." Miss Marple's eyes did not move. "You will sit in the back pew on Sunday and listen while the vicar tells the truth. You will not leave early." When he had been taken away, more safely angry than contrite, Slack said, "You call Willett the devil." "I describe the speed of temptation in a desperate heart," Miss Marple said. "She is a woman frightened of being small under a man's thumb. Fright breeds unkind remedies." He looked at her. "And the charge?" "You will bring it," Miss Marple said. "But listen once more first." They went to Mrs. Willett's. She received them without flinching and sat, hands folded. Slack read the findings. Martha nodded. He asked if she had dusted a biscuit. She said yes. He asked if she had meant that dust to kill. She closed her eyes. "I meant it to stop him," she said. Miss Marple leaned forward. "Did you varnish the top?" "Yes," Martha whispered. "So the sugar would cling. And did you place the plate in shade?" "I told Elsie to." "She is a good girl. You did not move the sugar bowl?" "No." Slack took a breath. "Mrs. Willett, I am going to—" "Inspector," Miss Marple said, and her hand touched the table. "One more question. When you painted the saucer last week, what did you use to dry it?" Martha blinked. "The window." "Of course," Miss Marple said. "Thank you." In the lane, Slack muttered, "What in heaven's name?" "The saucer," Miss Marple said. "Varnish near a window gathers gnats. There was one on the fleck Haydock found. It is not proof of guilt. It shows the hand belonged to a room with a window and a woman who thinks of drying time. But even so," she looked back at the house, "she did not hand him death. She arranged temptation and relied on habit. He reached for it himself. Is that mercy?" "It is human," Miss Marple said. "And human is what the court must weigh." That afternoon the village resumed its noises. Miss Marple wrote a note to Dr. Haydock, asking for the time, minute and second. Between Mr. Trelawney's bite and his fall, each witness remembered it. She added, "Biscuit first. Sip second. Your opinion of sequence." When she sealed it, she smiled. The end of a pattern is tidy, but its beginning is a fray. Tomorrow would draw the threads. Tonight would be for patience. She set her knitting on her lap and let the light go as guilt is. "Seen?" Sunday came with a hush that belonged to chapel. Bells and swept steps. St. Mary Mead put on its clean face and wore its uneasiness beneath like a spare handkerchief. Miss Marple woke early, wrote 2 sentences on a card and slipped it into her hat. Little prompts like pins keep fabric from sliding at important moments. Before service, Inspector Slack arrived with Dr. Haydock. The doctor's manner was grave but content. "From witnesses and the inquest notes," he said, "the interval between Mr. Trelawney's first bite and his fall was 30 to 40 seconds. Too swift for a mere sip unless the dose was strong. The varnish fleck would hold a dusting. I should say the biscuit delivered the blow." "Thank you," Miss Marple said. "A roof and a case both profit by good timings." Slack checked his watch. "We'll attend the sermon. Afterwards you may have your little talk if you still wish it." "I do," she said. "But I shall have it before the final hymn." The church gathered by habit. Reverend Drake read the lesson. Lydia turned pages with a composure newly learned. Miss Marple watched faces, the colonel rigid, Martha Willett pale and neat, the village intent upon itself. At the notices, Reverend Drake left the pulpit and, holding the lectern as if it were a friend, told the parish plainly what had been done with the relief fund and how it had been repaid before Easter. He asked forgiveness without embroidery, and promised accounting henceforth as open as a cupboard, with both doors wide. When he finished, a respectful rustle sounded like community. Miss Marple rose. "Reverend, before the final hymn, might I say a word of thanks?" The village never denies Miss Marple a word. She uses them thriftily, and they return interest. She turned in the aisle. "There has been a death among us that was not kind. Inspector Slack has found much. Dr. Haydock has found more. But there is a little housekeeping of truth to finish. It will save our steps later if we do it now. Murder, when it comes at tea, comes by patterns. A man who liked to be seen in command made an arrangement he hoped to turn into a display. A single lump with a place for wickedness to cling, and a reason later for his hand to be on the tray. A woman who could not bear being made to perform gratitude made a smaller, tidier arrangement at home. A sugared biscuit given the faintest varnish so a dust would hold. But crime makes drafts in odd places, Miss Marple went on. After Mr. Trelawney died, fear kept walking. There were letters imitating his hand. They were written by someone who could not endure to lose the leverage he enjoyed while the man breathed. That someone is not the woman who poured. Colonel Marchmont stood, then sat again because the church is stronger than a man's impulse. Slack did not move. There were also rehearsals, Miss Marple said, drawing a small card from her hat. A coin under a tray, a window pane at the inn. The sugar bowl turned so a crowned lump sits to hand, tongs newly polished to behave. One mind prefers noise. The other prefers tidiness. Both are wrong, but not the same wrong. "Mrs. Willett," she said at last, "you prepared the biscuit. You meant to stop a public parade in your garden. You did not place it in his hand. You relied on what you knew of him. That reliance was your sin. Colonel Marchmont," she added, "you prepared a cube and you wrote the letters. You meddled at the inn because you cannot bear loose ends. That meddling is not murder, but it is the kind of meanness that bruises villages. You will answer for it." Reverend Drake's simple, "Thank you, Miss Marple," released the room. The final hymn rose unsteady at first, then full enough to carry weight that had been sensibly redistributed. After the dismissal, Inspector Slack asked Martha Willett to step with him into the vestry. Colonel Marchmont was invited as well. Lydia touched Miss Marple's sleeve, and for once tears stood unapologetically in the girl's eyes. In the vestry, the festival roses still gave out their patient scent. Slack closed the door. "Mrs. Willett," he said, "you know what I must do." "Yes," she answered. "If there is mercy in your questions, extend it to Elsie. She swapped the plates for shade because I taught her years ago that sun makes icing run. She has done nothing except what good girls are trained to do, keep things from spoiling." "I know," Slack said. "Dr. Haydock's timings and the varnish on the crumb are enough for the charge. You will have a solicitor." "I shall not have Mr. Trelawney," she said, almost with wonder, as if saying his name had been the weight and not the man. Slack turned to Marchmont. "As for you, uttering threats, attempting to pervert the course of justice, and being a nuisance—" "Write it," the colonel said hoarsely. "Write it all. Only tell them I did not poison him." "I shall," Slack said. Formalities were met and promises taken. The vestry emptied, leaving Miss Marple and the vicar. He sat abruptly. "Is there absolution for any of it?" "There is proportion," Miss Marple said. "We are too fond of one word to cover everything. I preached truth and feared the letters. You did well," she said. "Courage is not tidy either." They stepped into the churchyard where the ewes keep their own counsel. Lydia waited by the lich gate. "He will go on, won't he?" She asked of her uncle. "He will," Miss Marple said. "He has people to tend and roofs to mind. And you have roses to prune without imagining anyone is watching." Lydia laughed once, small and real. News moves quickly and settles slowly. By evening, St. Mary Mead had rearranged its conversational furniture to accommodate the new knowledge. Mrs. Price Ridley approved the sermon and deplored suicide by reputation. Miss Hartnell declared that women should be taught to endure, which is to say, to endure differently. Mr. Sampson, having seen greed and grief at close quarters, sold out of plain biscuits first, for the first time anyone could remember. Miss Marple walked home past hedges that had begun to look like themselves again. At her gate she met Tommy Pierce wobbling valiantly. "All right, Tommy?" "Yes, miss," he said, then added in a rush, "I like plain biscuits best." "So do wise boys," she said, and he pedalled off, relieved of a principle. At her table she took out the card from her hat and added a final line beneath the 2 sentences she had written in the morning. "Biscuit first. Letter later." Then she put the card away with the other little papers she never shows, and made herself a cup of tea, plain, hot, untheatrical. She sat while the kettle sighed and thought less of guilt, which is particular, than of the ordinary ways people betray themselves, and how noticing kindly can still be just. Outside the village breathed again, and the roses kept their counsel in full bloom, quietly. The summer weeks that followed moved gently, as if the village itself wished to smooth the ripples of scandal. Mrs. Willett remained in custody, awaiting her trial, her house shuttered but not abandoned. Flowers still bloomed, tended by Elsie with steadfast loyalty. Colonel Marchmont, chastened but unrepentant, carried on his rounds with less bluster, his pride bruised but not erased. The Reverend Drake, though greyer at the temples, found his pulpit voice steadier for having spoken the truth aloud. And Lydia, freed of her constant dread, walked the lanes with a composure that now looked genuine rather than forced. St. Mary Mead, as villages do, adjusted itself to a new balance. Gossip, that most reliable form of local record-keeping, soon shifted from murder to the fate raffle, and whether Mrs. Price Ridley's marmalade had been judged unfairly. Yet beneath the ordinary talk lay the quiet acknowledgment that evil had once sat at their tea-table, disguised by china and sugared biscuits. Miss Marple, true to form, sought no applause. She accepted cups of tea in neighbours' drawing-rooms, listened to tales of rheumatism and recipes, and offered her mild observations on gardens, children, and the importance of minding details. No one, save Inspector Slack, fully realized how those details had unravelled the threads of a crime that might otherwise have gone unseen. One evening, as dusk mellowed the village into shadow, Inspector Slack called at her cottage. He found Miss Marple with her knitting basket beside her, and the window open to let in the scent of honeysuckle. It was tidy in the end, he said, lowering himself into a chair. Biscuit varnished and sugared, a habit trusted. That finished him. Marchmont's scheming, too clumsy to succeed, gave us just enough to see the contrast. Both guilty, though in different ways. You had it straight before we did. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking softly. Oh, not straight, Inspector. Human nature is never quite straight. Mrs. Willett did not poison out of greed or ambition, but because she could not bear humiliation. It makes her no less guilty. But one must see the motive clearly if one is to understand. And Colonel Marchmont. Well, there are men who cannot abide not being in command. His pride wrote those letters as surely as his hand. Slack grunted. Still, it will be the woman who pays the heavier price. Yes, Miss Marple said gently. The law punishes the act, not the thought, but in our hearts we must weigh both. For what is society if not a constant balancing of small judgments, each laid upon another like stitches in a garment? Some keep the fabric whole, some unravel it. She paused, eyes thoughtful. I often think murder is less about the moment of death than about the slow accumulation of resentments and fears. People imagine it is sudden, but in truth it is like embroidery, each stitch set long before the pattern is seen. Slack looked at her for a long moment, then rose. You make it sound inevitable. Not inevitable, Inspector. Only human. She folded her knitting neatly. And human nature, I have always observed, is both our frailty and our clue. One need only watch it carefully. He left her then, and Miss Marple sat alone as twilight deepened into night. The village lay quiet, its cottages orderly against the sky, the church tower a steadfast sentinel. Life would go on, teas poured, gardens tended, gossip exchanged. Yet beneath the ordinary, the memory of sugared biscuits and a broken teacup lingered, a reminder that beneath the calmest surfaces lie the most turbulent secrets. Miss Marple reached for her cup, plain and unadorned, and took a slow sip. The tea was simple, unflavoured, without sugar or embellishment. She found it infinitely comforting, and as the clock struck the hour, she reflected, as she always did, that there is no puzzle in life so intricate that patience, observation, and kindness cannot eventually unravel it. And with that thought, she bent once more to her knitting, the small, steady click of needles echoing softly in the quiet heart of St. Mary Mead.